This is about the most famous ceiling in the world, where God extends his hand toward man, and man does not quite touch it. For more than 500 years, millions of people have looked up inside the Sistine Chapel, wondering why Michelangelo left that empty space between the two fingers. We are going to take it apart piece by piece. Who painted that scene, how he painted it, and the different explanations that have been proposed to understand that gap of barely 2 centimeters separating humanity from its creator. The man behind the brush. Understanding why that scene exists requires first understanding who painted it, and above all, who did not want to paint it. Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti. Simoni was born on the 6th of March 1475 in Caprese, then part of the Republic of Florence, and died on the 18th of February 1564 in Rome. Although long before becoming the painter of the Sistine ceiling, he already considered himself, first and foremost, a sculptor. At the age of 13, he entered as an apprentice in the workshop of the painter Domenico Ghirlandaio in Florence, and shortly afterward began studying classical sculpture in the Medici Gardens under the tutelage of Bertoldo di Giovanni. By the time the Sistine Ceiling Commission arrived, he was already famous for 2 works that had established his reputation: the Pietà, completed in 1499, and the David, sculpted between 1501 and 1504. In his own lifetime they called him Il Divino, the Divine. And here is the detail that will prove crucial later in this video. Michelangelo had studied human anatomy by dissecting cadavers, with ecclesiastical permission, at the hospital of Santo Spirito in Florence. The commission he did not want to accept. The Sistine Chapel did not begin with Michelangelo. It was built between 1473 and 1481 by order of Pope Sixtus IV, from whom it takes its name, and its walls were already decorated by artists such as Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, Perugino, and Signorelli. The original ceiling was simply a starry blue sky, the work of Pier Matteo d'Amelia. Around 1504, the problem appeared. A structural crack damaged the vault, probably caused by nearby construction, and the papal architect Donato Bramante had to reinforce it with iron tie rods. It was then that Pope Julius II, who held the papacy between 1503 and 1513, and was known as the Warrior Pope, decided to replace that old ceiling with something new. The first contract was signed on the 8th of May 1508, and the original plan was far more modest than what we know today. 12 apostles in the pendentives and a geometric filler decoration. Michelangelo called it a poor thing and ended up negotiating a far more ambitious scheme. According to his own account, the Pope gave him a new commission to do whatever I wanted. And here a myth needs dismantling before we go any further. The popular image of Michelangelo lying flat on his back on a scaffold, brush dripping paint onto his face, was popularized above all by the 1965 film The Agony and the Ecstasy, starring Charlton Heston, but the accounts of his own contemporaries, the biographers Giorgio Vasari and Ascanio Condivi, tell a different story. Michelangelo painted standing up, on a self-supporting scaffold designed by Piero Rosselli, with his head tilted backward for hours on end. He drew himself that way, painting on his feet. The artist himself left a record of the physical suffering it cost him in a sonnet addressed to his friend Giovanni da Pistoia. He wrote that he had developed a goiter from that torture, that his beard was pointing at the sky, and that his brush, constantly dripping paint, made of his face a good floor for the drops. In that same poem he lets slip something devastating. I am not in the right place, I am not a painter. That discomfort was documented medically as well, because the effort caused him back and neck pain, and for years he had to hold letters above his head in order to read them, a consequence of the accumulated visual fatigue. There also exists a memorandum written in his own hand, dated the 10th of May 1508, where he notes, "Today, the 10th of May 1508, I, Michelangelo sculptor, have received from His Holiness our Lord Pope Julius II 500 papal chamber ducats, on account of the painting of the vault of the chapel of Pope Sixtus, on which I began work today." 3,000 ducats. That was the total contract sum, of which those 500 were only the first payment, a considerable amount for the period. The relationship between artist and pope was not an easy one. According to Vasari, Julius II asked incessantly when the work would be finished, and Michelangelo replied that he would finish when I am satisfied as to its artistic details. The Pope, according to the same account, answered, "And we want you to satisfy us in our desire to see it done quickly," and went so far as to threaten to throw him off the scaffold if he did not hurry up. How to paint a ceiling that will last for centuries. The technique Michelangelo used is called buon fresco. Pigments are applied directly onto plaster, or lime, while it is still wet, so that the color bonds chemically with the wall as it dries. This technique allows almost no room for error and forces the artist to work in sections called giornate, days, each one equivalent, roughly, to what an artist can cover while the plaster remains fresh in a single working day. The ceiling was painted between 1508 and 1512. The preparatory work was completed by the end of July 1508, and from there Michelangelo advanced across the vault, first covering the half closest to the entrance, from the drunkenness of Noah to the creation of Eve, a block he closed in September 1510. Then came a pause, prompted by a dispute over payments while the Pope was away on a military campaign in Bologna, and on the 14th and 15th of August 1511, a first partial unveiling of the work was held to mark the Vigil of the Assumption. It was precisely during that second block of work, around 1511, that he painted the scene that concerns us today, the creation of Adam. The complete ceiling was unveiled on the 31st of October 1512, and the following day, the 1st of November, the inaugural Mass was celebrated. Julius II, the man who had driven the entire project, would die barely 3 months later, in February 1513. The final result reached a scale that is hard to imagine. More than 300 figures spread across 9 central scenes from Genesis, 7 prophets, 5 sibyls, 20 male nudes known as ignudi, and the ancestors of Christ, all on a vault roughly 40 meters long by just over 13 meters wide, at a height of about 20 meters above the chapel floor. The scene, where it is and what it represents, within that enormous ensemble, the creation of Adam occupies a very specific place, almost at the exact center of the vault, in the 6th bay, between the scenes of the creation of Eve and the separation of the waters. It is the 4th scene in the chronological order of the Genesis narrative, although it was among the last to be painted within that second block of work. Its dimensions are 280 by 570 centimeters. Nothing extraordinary compared with the rest of the ceiling, but it has become the most widely reproduced fresco in all of Western art history. The composition illustrates a very specific passage from the book of Genesis. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," and that is why God and Adam share bodies of similar proportions, almost like reflections of each other, underscoring that idea of resemblance between creator and creature. There is, however, a central difference in how they are depicted. God's hand appears tense, active, charged with energy, while Adam's hangs languid, fingers slightly curved downward, as if he has not yet received what he is about to receive. There lies the heart of the question that gives this video its title. Between those two index fingers, there is a space of barely 1.9 centimeters, a minuscule gap that has been generating interpretations for centuries. The traditional reading, the instant before life, the most widespread explanation, the one repeated by generations of art historians, is theological. The fresco does not represent the moment of contact, but the instant just before contact, when life, or the divine spark, is about to pass from God to Adam. Under this reading, that gap is neither an error nor a compositional coincidence. It is the true subject of the painting, not creation consummated, but creation on the verge of being consummated. Some scholars take this idea a step further and propose that the separation between the fingers symbolizes the unattainability of divine perfection for the human being, that drawing near without ever quite reaching it. Another widely cited reading connects the scene with free will. The asymmetry of the poses makes it plain. God stretches to the maximum, actively seeks man, makes all the effort, while Adam remains relaxed, almost passive. Under this interpretation, the connection with the divine does not arrive on its own. It depends on an act of will on the part of man. God offers. Adam has not yet responded. There also exists a possible literary source for this image, the medieval hymn, Veni Creator Spiritus, which invokes the finger of the paternal right hand, an expression that may have directly inspired Michelangelo's composition centuries later. And there is a detail in the scene that usually goes unnoticed. Beneath God's left arm, wrapped in the same mantle, a female figure appears alongside a child, whom God seems to point to with his other hand. The most common interpretation identifies that woman as Eve, not yet created, and the child as Christ, so that in a single instant, Michelangelo would be hinting not only at the origin of Adam, but at the future of all humanity that will come after him. All of this fits with Christian theology and the religious context of the work, but in 1990, an entirely different interpretation appeared, and this time it came not from the world of art, but from medicine. The unexpected twist, a brain hidden in the fresco. On the 10th of October 1990, the medical journal JAMA published an article by Frank Lynn Meshberger, an obstetrician-gynecologist from Anderson, Indiana, with a startling thesis: the shape formed by God, the angels surrounding him, and the reddish mantle enveloping them is not just any cloud. It reproduces, with remarkable precision, a cross-section of the human brain. Meshberger identified within the outline of that cloud elements he linked to real brain structures: sulci, the sylvian fissure, the brainstem, the basilar artery, the pituitary gland, the optic chiasm. His conclusion, written verbatim in the article, read as follows: in the fresco traditionally called The Creation of Adam, but which might more aptly be titled The Endowment of Adam, I believe that Michelangelo encoded a special message consistent with thoughts he expressed in his sonnets. According to this reading, God is not merely transmitting life to Adam, he is transmitting specifically the gift of intellect, of reason. This theory is not as far-fetched as it sounds at first, and one need only recall the fact mentioned at the start. Michelangelo had dissected human cadavers with ecclesiastical authorization at the Hospital of Santo Spirito in Florence, so his knowledge of human anatomy was real and profound, not some passing artistic intuition. The matter did not stop there. Decades later, in 2015, a group of researchers led by Stefano Di Bella published another article, this time in Mayo Clinic Proceedings, with an entirely different reading of that same red cloud, not a brain at all, but a uterus after delivery, with a hanging green band representing a freshly cut umbilical cord. In their own words, published in that article, we see a postpartum uterus and adjacent anatomy, which justifies our interpretation that Michelangelo was representing something far more fundamental, the birth of humanity. There remains yet a third anatomical reading, published in 2019 in the journal Clinical Anatomy by Davis de Campos, which identifies in Adam's body a hidden rib, a reference to the biblical origin of Eve. Brain, uterus, rib, 3 different medical interpretations for the same image, and that is precisely where the controversy enters. Real science, or shapes in the clouds. Not everyone bought the brain theory. Many art historians rejected it from the outset, starting with Kathleen Weil-Garris Brandt, professor of fine arts at New York University and Renaissance art consultant to the Vatican Museum, who was blunt. She described Meshberger's thesis as a projection of the author's own modern knowledge onto Renaissance culture. In her words, all the elements of the image have deep traditional roots in the visual culture of the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. God is more than a flying brain. Professor Olan Rand of Northwestern University was equally skeptical when asked about the theory in 1990. He admitted he had never heard of anything like it and had always assumed it was simply a cloak. An ophthalmologist consulted at the time by the New York Times summed up the underlying problem with a phrase that has been widely repeated since. If you look at an image long enough, you end up seeing all sorts of things in it. It is the age-old tension between traditional symbolic interpretation, backed by centuries of theological and historical scholarship, and modern readings that apply 20th and 21st century eyes to a work from the early 16th century, with no definitive verdict between the two. Michelangelo left no note explaining exactly what he intended to represent in that red cloud, and a significant portion of his original sketches were lost or destroyed. What has survived are 2 preparatory chalk studies, now in the British Museum, one from 1508, in black chalk, showing Adam's inert hand, and another from 1511, in red chalk, showing the reclining torso, that many link to the influence of a classical sculpture, the Belvedere torso. An image that escaped the chapel. Whatever the correct interpretation, one thing is beyond dispute. This image became one of the most widely reproduced in all of art history, and over time it found its way into places far removed from Vatican City. One of the most frequently cited examples by art critics, among them Andrew Graham Dixon, is the promotional poster for the 1982 film E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the work of illustrator John Alvin, whose glowing finger about to touch Eliot's finger directly echoes Michelangelo's composition. It should be noted that no official statement from Spielberg or the studio confirming that intention exists. The connection is pointed out by critics and journalists, not by the poster's creators themselves. The reference also appeared on far more recent television, in the finale of the first season of the HBO series Westworld, aired on the 4th of December 2016. The character of Dr. Robert Ford, played by Anthony Hopkins, explicitly mentions the theory of the hidden brain in the creation of Adam. And of course, the image ended up becoming one of the internet's favorite templates for memes and parodies of every kind. From parodic religious versions to video game tributes, with countless variations substituting God and Adam for other characters. What remains today of that ceiling? After more than 5 centuries, the fresco is remarkably well preserved. Between 1980 and 1994, a major restoration was carried out, funded in large part by the Japanese broadcaster Nippon Television Network Corporation, in exchange for exclusive reproduction and filming rights to the work. $4.2 million was the total investment, and the portion corresponding to the ceiling was completed in December 1989. That work removed centuries of soot and layers of accumulated varnish, and restored to the frescoes colors far more vivid and intense than anyone had seen for generations. It was not a restoration free of controversy. The historian James Beck, among other critics, maintained that the cleaning had been too aggressive and may have removed retouches made by Michelangelo himself after the plaster had dried. Although the Vatican restoration team and an international panel of experts endorsed the result, and today, the conservation is no longer considered a problem. As for its current popularity, The Vatican museums received 6,825,436 visitors in 2024, a figure that makes them the second most visited museum in the world, behind only the Louvre. The Sistine Chapel, with the creation of Adam on its ceiling, is usually the last room on the tour, and for a great many visitors, the main reason for the visit. Back to the opening question. Let us return, then, to where we started: why Adam does not want to touch God. The honest answer is that no one knows with total certainty, because Michelangelo never explained it in writing, and what we do have are different readings built up over the course of 5 centuries, each with its own logic. There is the theological reading, which sees in that space the sacred instant, just before life passes from God to man, and the free will that demands an active response from Adam. And there is the modern scientific reading, which proposes that Michelangelo, drawing on his real knowledge of human anatomy, hid inside that same image a brain, or perhaps a uterus, a message within the message, visible only to those who knew how to look with a doctor's eyes. The truth may lie somewhere in between, or it may be that Michelangelo simply left that space so that, generation after generation, we would keep asking ourselves the same question that brought us to this video. That uncertainty, more than any definitive answer, probably explains why this image, painted by a man who did not even want to call himself a painter, remains, 500 years later, one of the most looked at images in all of history.